Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're going to let everybody start trickling in a little bit before we get started. Oh, cool. Awesome. Hi, Seb.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Good.
Sweet. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Zack Solomon. I am the manager of membership and education for the Palm Springs International Film Society. Thank you so much for coming to our They All Laughed Q&A program. This is sort of our program for all of you of some of the best comedies that we have in the festival, and we're really excited to talk to all these filmmakers. Before we get started, I just want to do some housekeeping. We at the Palm Springs International Film Society and Festival stand with Black Lives Matter, the anger that everyone is feeling collectively. We are in support of that, and we want to acknowledge the pain and the anger and the frustration that we are all going through as a country right now, and be a part of the healing of that. And these Q&As have very much been, for me, they are about not about distraction, but they are about empathy building and conversation and sharing. And that's what this has been about. And it's been really great to have all of you attend. And it's been really great to be able to have filmmakers come. This is one of the few avenues that we have of being able to do an exhibition component to our festival and have you get to engage with filmmakers. So we're really happy to be putting it on. I want to have the filmmakers introduce themselves to everybody. And we can start by the way that I visually see it anyway. So Francesca, would you like to introduce yourself to the members?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Francesca, or Frankie, and my film is Friends Like That.
Ryan?
Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan McLeod, and I'm the writer-director of Haas.
And Seb?
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Seb Demi, and I am the writer-director of Black Title here.
And Julia?
Hi, I'm Julia Kennelly, and my film is called Marcy Learns Something New.
And then we have my cohort and partner in crime for the evening tonight. Phil, would you introduce yourself to the members really quick?
Sure. I'm Phil Siegel, and I'm the programming assistant for ShortFest this year.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me. For the members, you've probably been going to a lot of these, so if you can see at the bottom, there is the Q&A button. Feel free to put your questions in there at any time. We will get to them towards the end, or at least after the first kind of block of us discussing the movies. We'll get to them as they go. We can also answer them live too, so it might be a clarification of something, and we can answer any questions there as well. So again, thank you all for attending, and thanks to all the filmmakers here. I'm just going to start it off with kind of a general sort of process question, which is your films all sort of have like a rhythm, like a comedic beat and rhythm to it. And how do you sort of how have you sort of come about finding your pace or your rhythm with writing comedy and then translating that to the screen? If Julia, would you mind starting it off?
Sure. Well, in the case of this film, actually, we redid it in post so much. So I don't know if the answer is necessarily in the writing in my case. I think it was something where there's a lot of sort of montage and setup in the beginning, and finding the right order to communicate all the information in a clear way and also in a way that preserved the tone that we were going for actually just required a lot of reworking in the edit. Which ended up being actually pretty close to what's scripted, but we had to go through the process of trying every possible option first before we got to that again, which was a very, at times painful process, but ultimately definitely worth it. And I think one of the things, if anyone, like I originally came from a theater background, and if anyone else has had that experience and transition into film, what's so difficult about it is exactly that thing where you're like, you're on set and you think everything is great, and then picturing how comedic timing is going to work perfectly in the edit is such a fine art that often, at least for me, requires reworking once you get there. But it's worth it when you finally get it to be what you want it to be.
Sev, how about you? How have you kind of come about finding your rhythm, and then yours is also sort of on the pilot episodic scale as well. But how have you sort of come about finding your rhythm in writing comedy and then translating it?
You know, it's funny because I know there's like a bunch of rules. I've actually started reading upon them more after I make my film. Like by page 8, you should have this happen. By page 15, I'm really, I'm not writing to try to be funny, but I think my personal perspective, I think life is funny, even amongst tragedy, even like every day, like just little things happen, even like irony is funny, you know? So, so I really just try to write in a way that I can relate and understand that the pacing is there's at least some little firecrackers going off in the action that make me feel almost like real life. Because even when I'm having a bad day, you know, when the Uber driver pulls up 10 houses down, I still have to find the humor in that. So I really try to write almost from that aspect. And yeah, and then in post, you find jokes that didn't work and you cut them and cut them and cut them and cut them until it seems like there's a rhythm.
Ryan, with Haas, the tone is very, it's sort of our kind of subdued comedy. Is that sort of your tone of what you normally want to do, or is that just kind of specific to each project, or is that a voice that you kind of have fallen into with a lot of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of like specific to each project, because my previous short film, Bountiful, was also like a comedy, I guess, but it was a lot more sort of like heightened and manic. And I think that Haas was, I kind of wanted the film to be dictated in its like rhythms by the main character, Haas, who's kind of not a guy who doesn't talk a lot and is kind of awkward in conversation and doesn't really like have a lot of sort of, I guess, like social skills, and isn't used to talking to people. And so he, you know, and he was kind of, we went into shooting it with a kind of rough outline, like a paragraph long synopsis, but not a specific script. And Haas was sort of, Pat, who played Haas, was kind of playing himself. So we just kind of set up the camera, and it's all like locked off wides. So we just kind of, you know, would do 10 takes of him just kind of doing a different version every time. And just because he would be thinking, there would be like these pauses in between every line that sort of became like the bedrock of like the style of the movie. So yeah, it was kind of a lot of the humor in it, for me at least, is in those moments where it's like, oh, I can relate to just like being in an uncomfortable conversation with somebody and like not really knowing like what to say next or what they're expecting to say. So yeah.
Sorry, I muted you by accident at the very end, but we got it. Francesca, your film feels both very personal and lived in, but also feels like it is very much in the visual palette of it does feel very familiar as far as like other movies that I love. What's the balance for you as far as like things that influence you, but also wanting to have the visual and the tone feel of your own?
I wish I could say that I had this really premeditated idea that we executed, but this was one of my first films at NYU, and in terms of tone, I was just like, I wanted to feel as real as possible, because I think it's really funny how pathetic certain things can be when you're sad, without being disrespectful whatsoever. So I just wanted it to feel as close to what true circumstances that I may or may not have experienced myself.
Okay, anyway, Phil, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so Ryan, you alluded to this a bit, and I would love to hear more about this from what you just said, but all these movies had casts that seemed exactly right, where I couldn't imagine anyone else playing these roles. So I was wondering if all of you could talk about how you found your casts and how you worked with them. I guess, Ryan, do you want to start? Because you already,
Yeah,
he was
yeah, for
playing
sure.
himself. That's, I
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
know more now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was kind of like the construction of the movie was sort of um, like I didn't really have the idea, and then sort of cast it like for the characters that I'd written, and then find a location. It was sort of the opposite. Like I had this house that was actually my grandparents' house, and it was going to be sold. So I was like, I need to shoot something here within the next 2 months. And so that was like, okay, I know my location. And then similarly, like Pat, who's the lead, he was just a guy who was like a church friend of my grandparents before they passed away. And just when he had no family, so he would just show up like at family gatherings like Thanksgiving and Christmas and stuff, and just sit like at the far end of the dinner table and not really like say anything. And I, like, as a kid, I was when I started thinking about making movies, I was just like, I'm gonna make a movie with this guy like someday. And then I was just like, when I found out that the house was going to be sold, I was like, oh, wait, I just have 2 months to do this now, and then I'll never be able to do it again. So I have to do that. And so I just like, his whole thing, like his whole role is just himself, basically. And then the secondary role, also my parents are in it. My mom plays herself. My dad is sort of in the background of like one of the scenes. And then the visitor, like the visitor spirit character, is a guy that worked at this bookstore in Brooklyn that I would go to all the time. And I like would see I saw his face, and I was like, I want to put this guy in a movie. He wasn't an actor, like that. Nobody in the movie was like an actor, but I just kind of was like, I think seeing these two people on screen together would be interesting for me. And I think they would have they're just like very dissimilar people, and they would have a strange dynamic together. And so it was just sort of like throwing it all in the pot and just like kind of letting it stew. And like I said, like when we would just do a take and just we kind of see how their rapport played out, because we didn't do any rehearsals or anything. So it was just kind of playing it as it laid.
Francesca, would you like to go next?
Yes, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, it was about how you put together your cast and worked with them.
Sure. My Roberta, I had she helped me read early drafts of the scripts, and she finally agreed to play the role of Alex, Roberta Colindres, and she was really great. And then Victoria was just a friend of mine, and they were awesome together. Roberta has a lot of experience, and Victoria was kind of really early in her practice, but we let them play off each other a lot, and it worked really well.
Sev, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I held like a non-union casting. I live in LA, so it's not too hard to get actors. But I had also made some films, so I have a little bit of a group of people that I like to work with. But I actually tried to tap their friends. So I went like one outer circle of the clique I was working with. So that's how I got one of the friends that comes over, PD. He's like a comedian in his own right. His friend had been in my past films. But funny enough, when I wrote the script, there was only one woman in the script. And when I did the casting, I met the French woman, and I liked her so much, I actually rewrote the script for 2 women. So during casting, I actually met characters that I liked, and then redid the script around that. And then the main character, James, we had casted a completely other guy, and just due to scheduling, he ended up having to back out like a couple weeks before. And then Rufus Burns, who plays the main character, I met online, and we met actually like the day before we started filming. But everyone else had rehearsed, so they had a rhythm, but Rufus was just really, really professional and did a great job. So it all worked out.
Julia, how did you get involved with Rachel?
Well, we were very lucky, and we had a wonderful casting director, Andrew Feminella, who cast for High Maintenance. And he was able to connect us to Rachel. And I knew that I wanted somebody sort of in that realm of like a woman with a very strong comedy background. And as far as, people who live in New York and are kind of down to do short films and such, Rachel was an obvious choice. And I was very very excited when she said that she was interested. So basically I had a phone call with her before, she agreed to do it. And then clearly that went okay. So she did the film, and she obviously is just such a lovely person to work with, and really makes the film what it is. I also, in regard to casting, I really wanted to have a real dominatrix to play the dominatrix teacher. And so we're also very lucky to get Ashley Page, who plays sort of a version of herself, and she's amazing. And it's just like super generous with everyone, and was a very fun presence to have on set as well.
So building on that, I know I read your press kit, so I know a little of the background. Can you talk about how is it dominatrices or dominatrixes, how you met dominatrixes and became interested in that world?
Sure, yeah. So I didn't know that there were sort of like the formal BDSM classes for beginners. That is like what's depicted in the film. And that was like, when I heard about that, I was very intrigued. And so I decided to like take some classes and figure out like, what is this about? And I just was impressed by like how many different kinds of people go. And like, it's really honestly a very positive and like lovely experience. It's a lot of almost similar to kind of like an improv class, and that there's all these people who are sort of like willing to go out on a limb and do something that could be so embarrassing, and that they know they don't really know what they're doing, but they're willing to like go learn about it in this group setting. So I just thought that was really fascinating, and I wanted to make a film that showed that, as opposed to the way that BDSM often gets portrayed, which is just, pretty shallow, and like usually like it's dark, or like, shows that some character has like a flaw or something like that. So I wanted to show how positive the community is, and how many different kinds of people engage in it and find it fun and joyful, and not like this sort of dark secret that it gets shown as.
It's definitely, when I saw the log line, I thought it might have been one thing, but it wasn't, what I thought it was going to be, which is a very pleasant and interesting surprise that came across very well.
Yeah, it's very sweet. The world is much sweeter than I think people think.
For Sev and Julia both, in the case of, for Julia, your movie feels like something that could be a pilot, but I could kind of feel that it wasn't necessarily a pilot for something. You might maybe you are working towards having it be expanded, but it felt like a movie. It didn't feel like a pilot for something. And then for Seb, your film is obviously something that is sort of working within maybe being a pilot, or is a pilot for something, but I can also feel the intention of wanting this to kind of work on a level of, an individual experience as well as on that. So I guess finding that balance of, is that something that you're thinking about as far as like the differences between cinematic language and TV language and comedy, when you're making it and beforehand and during?
I mean, simple enough, like for television, you don't have to have an ending per se, you're kind of keeping the story going. So with a film, hopefully for the viewer at least, they often want a button or some kind of conclusion that says, all right, now I see the full picture. So that gave me a little bit of freedom in writing this, because I knew I didn't have to necessarily button up. I needed to button up the day, but not button up the whole story. So that for me, that was probably something that I took advantage of. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And Julia, was that something that you were thinking about while making it, or yeah?
Yeah, I mean, well, so when I was making it, no, I did not think about it as a series. I sort of thought about it as a standalone story. It did take me a long time because so much, there's a lot of information you need to understand at the beginning of the movie for it to make sense. And I think for the emotional journey of the character to make sense. And so that was something that I was always like, fitting it into that like 15 minutes was hard. But then after I made it, and like people have been watching it, then a lot of people have been asking me like, well, are you going to make this into a series? So then I was like, okay, I guess I should think about making it into a series. So it's interesting. I feel like what I had started with this very sort of simple arc idea that does have an ending and is really a portrait of like one character. And then thinking about how, what are the elements of that I would take to expand it, to make an ensemble, and to exactly what Sev said, like to make something that's not about this ending and is more about this longer journey.
It's funny because I don't know if we have time. I was just going to add on with mine was, I mean, the loose idea with my story is basically like you live in LA, so many people here are trying to, make it in the entertainment industry. But a lot of your time is not caught up with being on set or writing scripts or being in Hollywood. It's just getting to work or washing your clothes or, day-to-day life that anybody does. So I knew that I felt like I could definitely keep telling this story because those scenarios are kind of never ending. So you often want to find something that will keep giving life. It doesn't always have to be that the character is stuck in a labyrinth. Sometimes the story itself will keep giving.
And Sev, I have a question, I guess, for Ryan too. I know, Sev, you have kind of outright dream sequences, and Ryan, yours has that dream disorienting feel. Can you talk about how you approach that?
I'll let you go first, brother.
Sure. Yeah, I guess, I don't know, I kind of did feel like the whole environment that the film is like set in, it's like a small town that's about an hour outside of Pittsburgh, and I always felt very sort of weird or like uncanny whenever I was there. And it did have like a different rhythm and like pace of life than kind of what I was used to, like in the area of West Pennsylvania that I grew up in. So I did kind of just want to have like give the movie that feeling too, like just have the sort of like anesthetized feeling of like that area just kind of hanging over the movie. And then it obviously like in the final act does kind of like give way to like an outright kind of spiritual or like surreal moment. But kind of leading up to that, I kind of wanted to ease people into, or not even ease them in, but just kind of drop them in like immediately to this world that is sort of dreamlike, but it actually is not that much different. I guess like similarly to kind of what I was talking about earlier with kind of having people play themselves, like it is dreamlike, but it's not too far from like how I guess my experience of that place like in real life was like. So I guess the whole movie kind of is a dream insofar as I like saw the place as a dream, and then just kind of becomes an actual like capital D dream at the end. But yeah, that's kind of what I had in mind. But
I guess I'm curious. Oh, go ahead, Seth.
Oh, no. Well, I was going to say dreams are tough because obviously they're left to interpretation. There's no like official language of how you get in and out of a dream or what color it should be or anything like that. So for me, I think I just tried to make the dream such a visual like departure from the rest of the project that you would kind of, I guess I was trying to get across that this guy is really far deep in his head. We're going to be in his everyday life, but we're so far in the subconscious. Visually, that was what I was trying to pull off, something that was really a departure from the reality. So you would know. I didn't have to like fizzle out or anything like that. But we did have him waking up. So it always kind of tells you it's a dream.
Sev, I have a question from Raymond Johnson asking just about the title. What does the title represent to you? Or what's the nature of the title?
Sure. I mean, I was just being a smart butt with the title. Obviously there's a lot of Black television shows and movies, and the first word is Black. So whatever Black, blue jeans or Black guy walk down the street or whatever. So in hopes of trying to make like a television show and not give it like a a trope identity about like the black basketball player or the black drug dealer getting out of the hood or something stereotypical. I just called it Black Title Here and kind of left it up to the viewer to add their own imagination of what they wanted it to be, you know.
Frankie, and can also be for all the other filmmakers here too, but this isn't always a question that I like to ask, but I think in this case it feels appropriate as far as were there certain movies that you were thinking about? Were there certain movies that you were showing people that you were working with beforehand? Is that sort of like a dialogue with other filmmakers or films that you had with your film?
Yes, in like the most immediate reach, I really liked Appropriate Behavior by Desiree Akhavan, and I showed my cinematographer Raising Victor Vargas, which seems to have nothing to do with this, but I was like, I really love the cinematography in that. And then I looked at some scenes in Transparent, and that was pretty much the most immediate film references, and then the rest came from stories that some of the actors and I had experienced.
Julia, you mentioned that you've done a lot of like theater as well. Is that do you work within also a cinema like kind of reference point? Is that the way that you work along with your theater experience?
Yeah, for sure. I more mean like I came to this world through theater, and like I had studied theater in college and stuff, but I work actually mostly as a line producer. But I mean, as far as film references for this film, this is kind of a weird one because it isn't really that similar, but I really love Sex, Lies, and Videotape. And I think one of the things about it that I connect to that I think is similar in this film is that I think a lot of films about sex are so, explicit, which is great for those films, but that seeing the sweetness and the vulnerability and the way that people deal with things that actually they find very shameful or very scary. I think that film does, really masterfully. And I really love that about it. And that's something that I was trying to capture with this as well.
Yeah, that's fun because obviously the tone of this doesn't feel quite as weighed down necessarily, but once you say that, I can totally see that. Sev, how about you? Were there like with the cast and the crew, were there cinematic things that you were kind of pointing to as far as like certain things?
I'm trying to think back. No, to be honest with you, the hardest thing that we were pointing at and really trying to figure out how we could replicate was the mukbang, which is the food eating thing. I was trying to figure out how to make it something that felt bigger than life, which a lot of us try to be on the internet. But at the same time, I wanted it to be something that you could connect to what's happening on the internet. So something that looks like, oh, this is what's happening on YouTube. So I think we found some kind of weird medium, but that was something that we were kind of like looking for something for a reference for, because we hadn't really seen it before on a cinematic level. And then other than that, no, a lot of it was like the dreams come from quotes that I tried to actually visualize and turn into visuals. So a lot of my stuff is kind of like story meta stuff.
Yeah. And then Ryan, we talked about the tone already, but there's a whole kind of milieu of that kind of tone of comedy of films that I immediately think of. Is that sort of were there any films that you were particularly thinking of with Haas in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, I don't know, with my DP, I was watching like a lot of sort of more, I guess, like I like read the Paul Schrader, like Transcendental Style book. And so I watched I showed him like Ordet, and we sat down with some Tarkovsky and like stuff like that. But then like the stuff that I was watching for performance, I was just like thinking about like Napoleon Dynamite and like, I don't know, like just like small town comedy movies. But I was hoping that by the end they would sort of fuse into some sort of weird confluence of those things. Also, the River, the Tsai Ming Liang movie, was another big one that was like, we're gonna have these lengthy like locked off shots and stuff. So we kind of were trying to like achieve the transcendental style thing without it being like a heavily like weighed down kind of dramatic movie. But yeah.
Phil?
Sure. For, I guess, Frankie and Julia, you both deal with the subject of, intimacy, and the fact that intimacy can be both ridiculous and still meaningful at the same time. So maybe you could talk about how you approached that and how you tried to find that in the pieces.
Sure, I'll go first. I mean, I think that, yeah, it's interesting because there's sort of this way that BDSM allows intimacy through this really heightened relationship. And so like, because you're playing these roles, then you can sort of see how people are actually taking very, very good care of each other through, this sort of strict adherence to what they've agreed they're gonna play out. At the same time in my film, obviously it's people who are very new at that. And so then that also creates some, ups and downs for them as far as like being unsure of whether you're doing it right, which is something that I think everyone feels in sex at some point in their life, in any case. So I think what I wanted to do is just to be clear, to show that thing of like, two people who are trying, like who are both really want to kind of do the right thing, and how you see both of them like hoping that something's going to go a certain way and really wanting the best for the other person in that, even as we see them, be uncertain or make mistakes.
Yeah, and then I kind of wanted to speak to the high level of intimacy that remains in queer relationships after breakups, all kind of under the guise of friendships, but they don't always really resemble a traditional platonic friendship. So it was both kind of characters thinking that they're in a comfortable space, but it's actually pushing a boundary that maybe neither of them are aware of.
I have a question from David. Not sure if I missed it, but did Julia talk about casting everyone else besides Rachel Dretch and Ashley? If not, how did you cast the people who were willing to put themselves out there for the intro class scenes?
Sure. So we were very lucky to have, in addition to Ashley, we also had a BDSM coordinator who's named Corey B. She's an educator, and you can see her on Instagram and stuff. She posted to her followers for people who might be interested in coming, and Ashley also did. So a lot of the people in those scenes are people who are in the community who brought their own stuff, who were excited to be in the film. Some of them are just my friends who I roped into joining me, and who are also game. And then I think we had some people who, we just did like a post on, backstage and whatever for extras. And, there are people who are down to, experiment and try something new. So we had a couple people, I think, who didn't come from the world, but for the most part, the people who were in the BDSM scenes either were a personal friend of mine or are in the community in some way.
We have time for a couple more questions. I want to thank everybody again for joining. I guess I'm curious, what does working right now look like for you? What are you working on, or what are you writing? And what are some things that are going on? And then we have time from the audience for a few more questions too. So after that, we'll get to one or two more questions. So what are you working on right now? Let's start with Ryan.
I don't know. I have been writing. I wrote like a first draft of a feature that I'm kind of still tooling around with and trying to figure out if it's actually like kind of the next thing. It would be definitely like impossible to shoot under sort of COVID restrictions, so it might be like a couple of years down the line or something, or animated or something. But aside from that, I have another short that I'm like finishing up sound design on, and then just kind of like trying to absorb things and brainstorm. But yeah.
Seb, how is the pilot being responded to? Are you showing it to people, or is there traction with the pilot moving forward?
I want to say yes. I want to say that there is attention. I haven't had that like meeting that makes me think we're necessarily on our way, but there's been a lot of positive response. And I don't think people are just saying it when they say they do feel like it could actually be a series. We went for that mix of Atlanta insecure vibe. So I think it has a palette that people already kind of have out there that's taste, that people like. So hopefully we're there. But until then, I'm writing like a futuristic piece. I don't know what year it's set in, but kind of based on people living separate from each other, living only with delivery drones to survive. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Julia?
Yeah, I'm working on a feature screenplay. And then as I mentioned before, I'm sort of figuring out how I want to approach making the short into a series. I think that process is, I don't know, it's sort of daunting, but it's exciting. And I think to Seb's experience, it's like, it's nice to meet with people and have them be really excited about it, but you never really know what any of that means until someone's like, here's your check.
Yeah, exactly. And the hard part for me, even, I wanted to shoot an episode 2, but I was like, is that a waste of time? Should I make a new project? You kind of have to make these creative and financial decisions, so.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Frankie?
Yeah, and I'm trying to finish up a short that I shot in January in Bergamo, Italy, right before COVID, and then came back here and then lost access to the editing rooms at NYU because of COVID. So we'll see.
Yeah. It's a crazy time to be a filmmaker right now. We're all trying to work at a film festival. We've spent a whole festival talking about the unique craziness of what's going on right now, and we're all sort of shooting in the dark to a certain extent, and it changes every day. We've had a conversation about intimacy coordinators on sets, and during the week of these, a lot of the attendees here have been in like intimacy or like, and not just like sex scenes, but like on set, actual like intimacy coordinators and emotional intelligence on set. And David asked, did Frankie or Julia work with an intimacy coach and or address issues around intimacy themselves with their cast or crew? Frankie, I can imagine that maybe you didn't have an intimacy coach, but you were the intimacy coach, I suppose, on your film.
I would love to have the budget for an intimacy coordinator. Really looking forward to that opportunity. But no, everything that was in the script, so everybody knew beforehand. And then in the scenes in the bathroom, in the bathtub, we had a closed set. So it was only me and the DP.
And Julia?
Yes, I did. So that role was filled by she was our BDSM consultant and intimacy coordinator and served as both. And I think, yes, I'm a huge fan of intimacy coordinators. I also just think in general, the more specific that you get with talking to actors about what they're going to be doing and allowing them to ask questions and say they don't want to do stuff will help you refine your vision as a director. And it's like, I think people often think of it as sort of like a box to check as far as like, oh, I just don't want someone to get upset, but I actually think it's a really valuable step creatively as well, because it forced you to be like, okay, what do I really need from this scene? And like, if this person doesn't want to do this thing, like, why did I put that in there? And like, does it need to be that way? So yes. And then I think I had something else about this. Oh, we also rehearsed because it was also a combination of stunt work and like intimacy in mind, which is an interesting thing because it wasn't sort of explicitly like sexual in the way that, a lot of people would define it. So we had to work with a stunt coordinator as well. So we did a rehearsal beforehand of just like all the physics of what we were going to do with, hitting people and all that.
Phil, do you have a question that you want to ask before we get going?
Nothing especially. I feel like everyone's had great answers so far. I don't really have a lot left to ask.
There we go.
I'll add this, I got the opportunity to screen this project in a theater before this festival. And you're always listening for what jokes kind of work. People laugh at the things you think aren't that funny. And then the one that you're like, oh, this is the one I'm going to kill him. And no one laughs. So it's weird with this experience because you kind of don't know how it's registering with your audience online. But at the same time, I feel like a lot more people have had the opportunity to see the film because it's not screening at just one time.
Yeah, we really miss being able to be in a theater, and there is something unique to that. But we're really grateful to be able to do this and have all of you here. And thank you so much for making this happen and being a part of this. We really appreciate laughing right now. I really appreciate your films and being able to. And thank you so much again for joining us today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing the Q&A experience to the internet.
Definitely.
Yeah, and thank the audience, thanks the members for we need you to do a Q&A. So thanks to all the members again, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.